Central Baptist Church tonight. Sorry I'm running a little bit late tonight. Uh, if you will, grab a songbook and turn to number 109, number 109, Send the Light. And I'll ask you if you will to stand and join in with me. Everybody helping out. There's a call comes ringing up, let's wait, send the light. Send the light. There are souls to rescue. There are souls to save. Send the light. Send the light. The blessed gospel light, let it shine from shore to shore. The blessed gospel light, let it shine forevermore. We have heard the Macedonian call, send the light, and a golden offering at the cross we lay, send the light, send the light. The blessed gospel light, let it shine from shore to shore, send the light, the blessed gospel light, let it shine forevermore. On the last, let us not grow weary in the work of love. Send the light, send the light. Let us gather jewels for a crown of love. Send the light, send the light, send the light. The blessed gospel light, let it shine from shore to shore. Send the light, the blessed gospel light, let it shine forevermore. Amen. All right, now let's go over several pages to number 319. Number 319, 319. And we'll sing the first and the last stanza there. Set my soul. Are we on 319? Okay. It's hard to sing a song if it's not the right tune. Set my soul afire, Lord, for thy holy word. Burn it deep within me, let your voice be heard. Millions grope in darkness in this day and hour. I will be your witness, fill me with thy power. Set shake hands with someone around you there. Tell them it's good to see you tonight. Well, good evening. It's good to welcome our Wednesday evening service. Tomorrow morning, the seniors breakfast at Eagle Lake Diner at 8:15 a.m. Don't forget to be praying about our service Sunday. We got started off to a good Sunday, even though we didn't get to have Brother McBride in both services Sunday. It turned out real good, and I appreciate Brother Morgan being with us Sunday night. There, he's for years they were missionaries in Romania, and then he came, and now for I don't know what 2 or 3 years I guess now he's been associated with the Landmark Baptist College there, the vice president, and doing a good work with that. And so you be praying the Lord bless this Sunday. We're going to be having Brother Carter from Landmark all day with us Sunday. And let's see here, what else is going on? The youth rally will be coming up the 21st, and Brother McBride will be back for that. He'll be preaching here at the youth rally. And Brother Tony asked me to announce that any of the adults that you want to come, that you're welcome to come. Of course, they always are, but just wanted to kind of emphasize that and be having Brother McBride again. Okay, also on the 22nd of the month, Saturday, the Sisters of Grace Luncheon, 3 p.m. in the Fellowship Hall. All right, Usher, would you come? Let's receive the offering. Okay. Brother Smith, would you lead us in prayer? Amen.
Amazing what kind of music you can get out of something that small, isn't it? But it's a blessing. When I was a kid, we used to pluck a piece of grass off and split it in two, and then you'd put it up there and blow it. Of course, it only made one sound. You didn't have all those different sounds with it, but I don't know who comes up with all those things, but that was one way we got to entertain ourselves. We didn't have computers and cell phones and television, all that kind of stuff. We didn't even have a radio when I was a kid. They were already in existence. Now, don't get me wrong, but we just didn't have one. We were too poor to have a radio. And we always lived so far out in the country, I don't know if you could have received anything if you'd had one. So, but appreciate that music, that good music. Get your prayer list out and look it over. If you have an addition for us to make, let us know. Or if you had a prayer request been answered, let us know about that too. I can't take the time to read off all of these because we have so many. It would take half the night for us to go through them, and so I'm just going to depend on you to look it over and for you then throughout the week to pray for these needs. I'll give you a chance after the Bible lesson each Wednesday night to spend our time in prayer, several minutes in prayer, and so I hope that you do have a prayer list, that you take it with you, and that when you go to the Lord in prayer, that you. The way I do it is because for the sake of time, is I'll just pick a section and pray about the needs. And sometimes, if not a whole lot, maybe 3 or 4 sections. But don't want you to forget our missionaries. Be sure to pray for our missionaries each week when you go to the Lord in prayer. Anne Marie?
I have 2 to add to the cancer list. Ann Baker, she's undergoing chemo and radiation right now for cancer. And her sister-in-law, Pam Lyons, Lyons.
Pam, did you say? Pam? P-A-M? Okay. Yeah, I've already had Ann on my personal list. She's my Barbarette. And but I just hadn't had a chance to get Pam to put her on this prayer list. Jim?
It appears that Diana's mother may be in the process of dying. She's in Ohio. Diana will be flying out tomorrow. The nurse told my sister-in-law, Sharon, that it appears that she's shutting down. She'll be traveling. You can pray for that.
Okay, for those that are home, Diane Leonard, add her to the traveling. Her mother or yours? Her mother is may be in her last days, so remember Diane as she travels there, and also pray for her and the family. Matt?
I spoke with Karen Rimmer Sunday, and she told me something about her daughter-in-law, Jennifer Rimmer. She's on the list, the prayer list now, but she had a fall, but she had some medical issues before that. She's in her mid-40s. She had some kind of episode, they're not really sure. But the bottom line is, I spoke with Karen last night. She called me and she said that she's going to be in rehab for a long time.
Okay, there's a home, Jennifer Bramer in rehab. That's Ms. Bramer's daughter-in-law. All right, Randy?
Afraid I have to add another one to the camping list. My wife's brother, his name is Ransom, his son Pam Ransom, Davis, D-A-V-I-S. And he's got stage 4, and they're not expecting him to last much longer.
Ransom Davis. Okay, Ransom Davis on the cancer list. And for those at home, again, Ann Baker and Pam Lyons, Lyons, on the cancer list. Someone else? Wayne? Okay, Wayne Smith's sister Elaine, she had surgery and came through it good. We'll just keep her on the get well. You can just mark out the surgery and keep her on the get well for a while. All right, is that it? Okay, stand again. Bill, come lead us in one verse of another song.
Okay, let's turn, if you will, to number 472. 472. Sing them over again to me, wonderful words of life. Let me more of their beauty see, wonderful words of life. Words of life and beauty, teach me faith and duty. Beautiful words, wonderful words, wonderful words of life. Beautiful words, wonderful words, wonderful words of life. Thank you. You may be seated.
All right, this is our fourth lesson on King Solomon. So turn in your Bibles to 1 Kings chapter 3. We started about a month ago, a series on King Solomon. And last Wednesday night, we dealt with his ascension to the throne. And you may remember it took maybe a small miracle actually for him to ascend the throne, because he was not really in line, because there were four brothers older than him that were in line ahead of him. But King David had promised Bathsheba, who was Solomon's mother, that Solomon would ascend the throne upon his death. And so with Nathan and Bathsheba together, they spoke to David after Adonijah had himself crowned to be the king, and so David then gave the order that Solomon was to be the next king of Israel. So we're going to look at Solomon now in all of his glory tonight. Solomon in all of his glory, and this is really kind of a fascinating lesson. It's just kind of hard to comprehend the riches, the majesty really that surrounded Solomon's time when he was on the throne of Israel. See, back then, in the time that we're dealing with here, the only place in the world that there was any amount of population was there in those Middle Eastern countries there around Israel, and today what's Iraq and Iran and Syria and those countries in there, up what today is Turkey, and even maybe some parts of southern Russia there that there would be a population, but the only population that you'd have in any parts of the West would be, of course, here in America, the Indians, and nobody really knows where they came from, how they got here. There's a lot of speculation about it, no real factual evidence of where and when they came. I do think, because I have Cherokee Indian blood in me, and so I feel like that the U.S. government did the Indians wrong when they came in here and drove them out of the land they were always settled in and sent them out in the deserts and places where there was no way to make a living. And so, you know, what were the Indians going to do? They had to defend themselves, so they turned against them. Did you know that the Indians here in Florida, the Seminole, that they have never signed a peace treaty with the American government? And my ancestors were Cherokees, and they were not very good fighters, and you know, they kind of got pushed around a lot, and evidently didn't have a whole lot of money. Some of those Indian tribes today, they're pretty rich because they got those gambling joints and everything, and so they back when we were living in Orlando, and Brother Smith, our pastor there, he became acquainted with an Indian pastor down in the Everglades. His name was Joe Billy. And he pastored a little church there in the Everglades. And at the time, Billy Osceola was the chief. And he was a Christian, or supposed to be anyway, a Baptist. But Joe Billy was the one who pastored the little church. In fact, Billy Osceola didn't even live in the Everglades. He lived over in Cape Coral. And had a big, nice home there, and a big, huge boat and RV and all that. I guess he got a lot of money out of being the chief of the Seminoles, but all the rest of them were very poor. We made a trip down there one time, some of the men from the church, to help Joe Billy do some repair work and everything on the church building and all that. And we at lunchtime, we got to go over to Billy Osceola's house. And it was kind of pretty amazing, you know, the way he was living in comparison to the way those Indians in the Everglades were living. So I don't know, you may not, if you don't have any Indian blood in you, may not feel the way I do, but I think the Indians didn't get a fair shake out of all that was going on back in those days. Anyway, that's got nothing to do with the lesson here tonight. I'm just filling you in here. 1 Kings chapter 3, we've dealt with this some and read this before, but I want us to go back and look at it again. In Gibeon, this verse 5, in Gibeon the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask what I shall give thee." And Solomon said, "Thou hast showed unto thy servant David, my father, great mercy, according as he walked before thee in truth and in righteousness and in uprightness of heart with thee. And thou hast kept for him this great kindness. Thou hast given him a son to sit on his throne, as it is this day. And now, O Lord my God, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David my father. And I am but a little child. I know not how to go out or come in. And thy servant is in the midst of thy people, which thou hast chosen, a great people that cannot be numbered nor counted for multitude." At this time, Israel was the greatest, most powerful, the richest nation on the earth. And Solomon here, he's, you know, acknowledging that these are a great people. And although Israel never considered themselves as a world empire, yet they were the most powerful empire on the earth at that time. He said, so he said, "To give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad. For who is able to judge this thy so great a people?" And the speech pleased the Lord that Solomon asked this thing. And God said unto him, "Because thou hast asked this thing, and hast not asked for thyself long life, neither hast asked riches for thyself, nor hast asked the life of thine enemies, but hast asked for thyself understanding to discern judgment, behold, I have done according to thy words. Lo, I have given thee a wise and understanding heart, so that there was none like thee before thee, neither after thee shall any arise like unto thee. And I've also given thee that which thou hast not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be any among the kings like unto thee all thy days. And if thou wilt walk in my ways, to keep my statutes and my commandments, as my father David did walk, then I will lengthen thy days. Everything else the Lord had said to Solomon was unconditional. But there was one thing here that was a conditional promise, and that's found here in this last verse. If, see that, now that makes it a conditional thing. If thou wilt walk in my ways to keep my statutes and my commandments, as thy father David did walk, then I will lengthen thy days. Now, because Solomon did not obey this, he did not walk in the ways that God had told him to walk and to be obedient in things, he didn't live to be very old. Bible scholars think that he was only around 60 years old, maybe, when he died. And it was not unusual back in that day for people to live, well up in years. And so in one sense, Solomon, because he did not obey the Lord in all these things, he didn't live as long as he would have. The Lord did not lengthen his days. So now the lesson tonight now is how God followed through and how God was faithful and Solomon was unfaithful, and how all of that was fulfilled just as the Lord had said. Now Saul, remember King Saul, the first king of Israel, he was content to dwell in Migron. He was content to dwell under a pomegranate tree. And then a little later, he was content to dwell under a tamarisk tree on the high place of Gibeah. You find that back in 1 Samuel. He was a tribal chieftain, the king over Israel. And then David, when David came along, David built him a house in the city of Zion. That's Jerusalem, just where Mount Moriah runs down to the Kidron Valley. But when you come to the days of Solomon, you step out of the simplicity of the days of Saul and the warring days of David into the luxury and the splendor of an oriental court. God gave to Solomon all of those things that a man's heart could imagine, worldly things, riches and fame and glory and honor, and all the world marveled at the favor and the blessing of heaven upon King Solomon. For example, here in chapter 4, you have recorded the princes who sat at his table and who were the lords in the land. There was Azariah, there was Elihoreph and Ahiah, not Ohio, Ahiah, the secretaries of state. There was Jehoshaphat, the recorder. There was Benaiah, the captain of the host of the armies. There was Zadok and Abiathar, the priest. There was Azariah and Zabud, sons of Nathan and nephews of Solomon. And then Nathan, the brother of Solomon. These are men who are charged with being the superintendents, the former the generals and the farmers and all of that to supply all the necessities for the court. And then there was Ahishar, who was the king's chamberlain, his high steward. In order to get to see the king, you had first to go through this functionary. Then here was Adoniram, who was over the tribute. That's the first time you come across that office. So when you have a great lavish court like Solomon had, it takes heavy taxation to support it. See, that's what's happened here in America. We're taxed to death because of all the spending of our politicians. And I'm glad. I don't know how you feel about it, but I'm glad they got somebody now that's doing away with a bunch of those unnecessary departments and trying to save us Somebody, have any of you seen the list? They had a list of things that we're sending millions of dollars for that it is unbelievable. I can't believe that people who are heads of different departments of government would approve such a thing as this. I mean, studying the sex life of frogs in some foreign country. Unbelievable. And they read off a lot of them there, and I thought, I can't believe this. I can't watch that. I just can't watch. You know, my blood pressure probably gets up to 300 over 250 when I see all that. There's no sense in that. And see, we're being taxed everywhere you turn, and we're sending millions and hundreds of millions of dollars to countries where they hardly have any taxation. Do you think that's right? You think that's fair? No, and if you elect me president, I'm going to do away with all. I think we ought to do away with all foreign aid and start all over again, and only start out supporting Israel, and then maybe some others. You know, if they show that they like us and all that. We're supporting countries that hate our guts. When the Soviet Union failed, America began to send hundreds of millions of dollars into Russia and made billionaires out of some of those guys over there that they were taking all the money to themselves instead of distributing it out to where it should have been going. And it's just a mess. It's a mess. But so here it takes a lot of taxation to support all this, and so this man here, Adoniram, the Bible in 1 Kings chapter 4, it says he was over the tribute. He was over the tax collecting situation there. And he was so unpopular, this man's off in the successor, he was stoned to death in chapter 12, verse 18. And then Solomon had 12 officers, and each one of those officers was responsible to provide for the court for 1 month. You had 12 officers, and so each month, each 12 months, you had a different one then that was responsible for taking care of the necessities, for the things, you know, that they had to have for Solomon and his court. And to show you the elevation of those 12 officers, 2 of them here in verse 11 and verse 15 in 1 Kings chapter 4, they're sons-in-law to Solomon. And these 2 out of the 12 had married the daughters of the king. And then in verses 22 and 23, you have a very interesting note about the lavishness of that court and its size. And I told you in the beginning of this that it would be impossible for me to outline this like, you know, point 1, point 2, and all that, because there's so much here about Solomon that it'd take me a whole year to go through all that the Bible has about him. And so trying to be as brief as I can, but yet still give you an overall picture of the reign of Solomon. I'm kind of giving it to you chronologically in his life, and of course, you know, like more like in story form. So if you're not able to keep up taking notes and stuff, I'm sorry, but that's just the only way we can do this to get through all of it. So here, let me show you what the Bible says about Solomon's provisions for just one day. This is what it took to keep up his throne and his mansion and all this stuff just for 1 month. It took 30 measures or scores of fine flour, chapter 4, verse 22. Now I've read that this amount, a score, that's 2,580 gallons of fine flour. And for one day to feed that court, it took three scores took 60 measures of meal. So that would be 5,160 gallons of meal. In other words, to feed that court that surrounded Solomon, it took 2,580 gallons of fine flour, 5,160 gallons of meal. It took, according to verse 23, every day 10 fat oxen and 20 oxen out of the pasture, and 100 sheep besides, and it begins to name the wild game, harts and roebucks and fallow deer and fatted fowls. By the consumption of that much food, Solomon had around him at least 10 to 14,000 people that served him, that worked for him in his court. And then he had, in verse 24 and 25, he had dominion from the Euphrates River down to Egypt, and from the Mediterranean Sea into the great lost wasteland of southern Arabia. Now, how was he able to sustain a vast court like that? Well, I'll tell you how and why. You know, here in America, we're told that a large part of our tax money goes toward the support of the military. And I'm not against that. I'm just telling you that a large part of our tax money goes for the support of our military. If we were not having, if you had worldwide peace, you were not having to have armies, support armies, which we don't have and never will have until Jesus comes and sets up his kingdom, there's going to be wars. So it's necessary that we do have armaments, that we have military, and that we support it. And I think we ought to have the strongest military on the face of the earth. I think one way to maintain peace is to have a strong military. But if we didn't have to have that, our taxation would be very small. So, you know, all of us could be millionaires, couldn't we, if we were not having to pay out a lot of taxes for everything. But the millions now, I read some time ago that while our military were in Iraq, in the invasion in Iraq, and the years that we were there, and all the tanks and jets and soldiers and the upkeep of the soldier and all of this, that we spent $6 trillion to keep our armies in Iraq. And in Afghanistan, because this was a longer period of time, it was even more than that. And so when you take that away, you know, if we're not having to be taxed for all that amount of money, just think about what we'd have. I mean, you know, maybe they wouldn't tax us as heavily. Of course, I don't know. I guess if you're going to study the sex life of frogs, you've got to put some money into that. But it's because of the fact that, and this is not just the United States, you know, most of the nations on the face of the earth do have to have military to maintain peace, you know, to keep other countries from invading them and all that. So a lot of our tax money is going for to keep up our military. I remember back. I was just a little boy. I was born kind of in between the end of the Great Depression and the beginning of the Second World War, and I can remember people in our family, relatives, and all. You know, when they get together, they were talking about, you know, when Roosevelt became president. You know, Hoover was charged with causing the Great Depression, but it really wasn't him. There was other things that caused that. But anyway, he was charged with that. And I remember, you know, my dad, my relatives, Hoover, he was about the worst thing that ever walked. And Roosevelt came along, and because he was instrumental in getting us involved in the Second World War, they had the idea that this is what brought about prosperity. It shoved out the Depression and brought about prosperity. Now, can you imagine people thinking that war causes prosperity? But that's what a lot of them did. And a lot of them thought that the war that caused it. But the reason that Solomon had this vast affluence, but was because at this time the people were at peace. It tells us here during his reign that they were at peace. Now he did have, soldiers and horses and all those things, but they were not having to be used in war, so you didn't have the expense that would come from that. You see, fortunately, we've been able to fight our wars somewhere else, but the cost of it is even greater because you got to get that stuff there. You got to get all those tanks and those fighter planes and all that. You got to get all that over there, and the jeeps and everything, and so there's great expense in that. But the reason that Solomon was able to put everything into, just into his court, so to speak, and all because the people were at peace. All the energies of the nation and the entire prosperity of the nation was poured into those things that the people enjoyed themselves. And if you ever think of it, that prosperity comes from war and from armament, and if we were to cut out those things, the people would immediately be impoverished. Just carry it to its logical conclusion. When you make a battleship, you don't promote the prosperity of a people. And when you make guns and tanks, when you teach men to march and to kill, you don't make for the prosperity of the people. All that, you can't have prosperity when you're putting money into that. I remember when I was a kid, and some of you maybe are old enough to remember this too, but I remember during the Second World War, because of the number of men that they had to send into the war, that there was not enough men left here to run the factories and to farm the farms, and so that's whenever it began this big, barrage of women having to put women into the factories, and also using the factories. See, but from 1942 to 1946, they didn't make any automobiles. They were busy building jeeps and tanks and airplanes and stuff like that, and so everything was going into the war effort. And then I don't know how many men. I don't remember now how many men from America, just as the United States, that were actually involved in that war. I know a bunch of my uncles and cousins and all. I know a bunch of them were involved in it. And my dad joined, but they turned him down because of some physical issue. I don't know what it was. Never did know what it was, but they turned him down. He was listed as 4F, so they didn't take him. But I had several uncles that were in that war, and so war is expensive. It takes away from and one that vast. It took away a lot of stuff. We had to have ration. They would send you ration books, and you could only buy so much. And you'd use those ration books, and that as long as you had one of those coupons, then you could buy whatever that coupon was for. If you didn't have them, when you ran out of them, you couldn't buy. And so the price of everything was so much higher and all because it was scarce. And so things were bad here in the South. the North recovered from the Great Depression faster than the South did. And then with the war coming in right behind that, and a lot of farmers, they could no longer farm. They were fighting the war. And so the South suffered more during the Depression and during the Second World War than the North, some of the northern states did. But the idea that war, brings prosperity, that's false. That's not true. They were showing a thing about, I think it might be the last ship that they built. It's a huge thing. About as big as some cities, Yeah, I don't know. You might have seen it also. They're talking about it on some TV program, and the amount of money it's taken to build that thing. I mean, you're talking about billions and billions of dollars. And when you consider that, there's no telling how many of those they'll build before it's all over, that takes money. Who's paying for that? It's our taxes. Our taxes. And every time I fill out my income tax, I'm crying and moan about the high price of being able to live in America, the United States, because we're and this doesn't count tax that you're paying when you go to the restaurant or to the grocery store or other places. Now, most anything that you buy anymore is taxed. It used to be. I think it used to be here in Florida they didn't tax groceries, but I think they do now. I don't know. My wife always did all that shopping, and all that stuff is new to me. I go to the grocery store now, but she's not able to, and it takes me a half a day because I'll go down an aisle. I'm looking for something, and then I'll get on another aisle, and then I'll ask the clerk, now where's this? It's back over in that aisle I just got off of, and so it takes me a long time to buy groceries. And it's also more expensive because I don't cook. I've got to get stuff that's already cooked so I can stick it in the microwave. Thank God for the microwave. We'd probably starve to death if it didn't have that microwave, or else eat a lot of cold food. but thank God for that. But now look here in flip over to chapter 7 here. We're talking here now about all this that being poured into the upkeep for Solomon and all of his court and everything, and then because they were at peace, that didn't have to spend money on war, and so they had all this had been poured in here because of peace. Now look here in see how Solomon fared in the 7th chapter of 1 Kings, and we're briefly going to see what he built. Now Solomon built the temple, and next week we're going to be talking about Solomon's temple. But he spent 7 years building the temple, and that is an entire lesson in itself about that temple that he built. But did you know that he spent 13 years building his house, his palace? And a lot of things there you can read about that we don't have time to look into. But in verse 2, chapter 7, verse 2, there was the house of they called it the house of the forest of Lebanon. He built the house of the forest of Lebanon. And then it describes how big it is, and they called that beautiful palace the forest of the house of Lebanon, the house of the forest of Lebanon, rather, because of the great columns that were in it. And it looked like a great forest of Lebanese cedars. And these cedars of Lebanon, that was something special back in that day. And the most remarkable thing about that palace was this. On the walls were 200 shekels of solid gold. Solid gold now. Big enough to cover a man's body. And there there were 300 shields of solid gold that you call bucklers, big round shields that a man would hold on his arm. Those beautiful shields must have been gloriously, intricately traced and decorated, and all the things that went with them. Can you imagine having a palace, and in that palace were 200 shields as big as a man made out of solid gold, and 300 bucklers made out of solid gold. And that was just one thing that he had in this beautiful palace. Then in the 6th verse, in the front of the house of the forest of Lebanon, he had a porch of pillars, P-I-L-L-A-R-S, not O-W-S, pillars. And then you look in the next verse, and further away, he made a porch for the throne, and that throne is described there in verse 7. The world has never seen anything like it. It was made out of ivory and overlaid with pure gold, and was raised 6 steps on all 4 sides. Verse 18, and then the back was rounded, and the arms were like lions. And there were 3 lions as these steps came up on each one of the 4 sides. So there were 12 lions then, representing the lion of the tribe of Judah. And it was on a sea of glass. It was on mirrors. And when the Queen of Sheba came and looked, it was as though the throne sat on the beautiful blue sea itself. The world had never seen anything like it. Remember the Queen of Sheba, and she was not poor. She was all the stuff that she brought, gifts for King Solomon. It shows that she came from a very affluent country, very, very rich. But she said, I've heard all these things, but she said the half was not told me. When I saw it, the half had not been told me. And so you got all of this here. And then in the 8th verse, he had the secluded cloister's court and house where all of his wives and all of the harem was kept. And he had there a beautiful palace for the house of Pharaoh and for Pharaoh's daughter, verse 8. And then it says, all of these were made out of beautiful and polished stones and overlaid with cedar and chased with gold, verse 9. Then we've got to hurry now. We turn over to the 9th chapter of 1 Kings. You have in the 9th chapter in verse 26, you have the story of the fleet of Solomon, which was really a marvelous and unusual thing. At the Gulf of Aqaba, down there on the Red Sea, Solomon built a fleet. And they went to Ophir, that is to India. That was the modern country of India. And they brought back 420 talents of gold every time they made a trip to India. Now, a talent is a weight, about what a man could carry in one trip. And they would bring to Solomon 420 talents, 420 of them in gold. That'd be one talent would be about what a man could carry, the weight he could carry. And so you had 420 of those. That's a pretty good chunk of gold, isn't it? They would do that in one trip. Now, in chapter 10, verse 11, and the navy of Hiram brought gold from Ophir, and they brought in from Ophir great plenty of almug trees and precious stones. All that brought from India. Now, don't worry if I'm not pronouncing some of these things right. I used to worry a lot about the correct pronunciation of these. And when I was in Israel, our tour guide there was a Jew, and I was talking to him about all the names and things and the words. And I've always been interested in words and the meaning of the names and all, because every child that was named back in those days, that name had a meaning. And it was the meaning that they took And the name then was from that, whatever that was, the meaning. Like the name Moses, we're told that the name meant drawn out of the water. He was drawn out of the water. So because he was a baby, drawn out of the water, the princes had him to be brought out of the water in the little ark that they'd built for him, and so they named him. That was his name because he was drawn out of the water. Now, so anyway, this guy over there in Israel, he told me, he said, don't worry about how you pronounce those names. It doesn't matter. Nobody's going to remember, and they don't know either. So don't worry about it. Just go ahead and whatever you want to put to it, that's okay. So I quit worrying about it. So if I don't get it right, then who are you to say that the way you pronounce it is right? So, All right, chapter 10 and verse 22, we're looking at this navy. And the king had at sea a navy of Tarshish. Now, some people used to think that navy went to Spain. But a great navy such as the Phoenicians used that went to Spain was called the Tyrian navy, a Tarshish navy. And once in 3 years, it took them 3 years to make that journey to India. And once in 3 years came the navy of Tarshish, bringing gold and silver and ivory and apes and peacocks. Now, all of those are Sanskrit names. That's the reason that we know that Ophir refers to Israel. Solomon's navy went to Israel, India, and brought back. Now listen, these Maharajas and those leaders over there, they put their fortunes in gems. I read that there were only 3 precious stones. And I have to be very careful here about this because we got an expert up there on gems and stones, Scott. And so he's checking me out every time I mention these things here. But I've read that there are only 3 precious stones. It's the emerald, the ruby, and the diamond. And back in those days, diamonds were so plentiful, they used them as decoration. We don't, most of it, we don't ever see anything like that. Never heard of anything like that. And when he brought those apes back, those monkeys, I can imagine the whole world turning upside down. Little kids, all of them going around there looking at those things that Solomon had. Nobody ever saw anything like that in Israel. And peacocks. I don't believe that to this day that a peacock is real. I mean, you ever see one of those things when they're wet or when when they're not, that those feathers not unfolded? That's an ugly, ugly, ugly creature. But when that thing fans out there, no more beautiful bird or whatever it's called in the world, is there? All those different colors and all that. I'm kind of like the old farmer. He saw one for the first time, and he said, that just ain't true. That just ain't true. Can't be anything like that. That was a mirage. When in our church there in Orlando, it was up back in those days, it was located on Lake Barton Road. Now that's called Cimarron Boulevard. Back then it was a little 2-lane asphalt road. And Lake Barton Road, well, over across the highway, that's before they built the houses, there was a peacock farm there. And sometimes whenever, in the service, Brother Smith would be preaching away, and those things would start making the noise. And it's unbelievable, the noise, the kind of noise they make. It's like a baby crying. And so you think, great day. They must have a load of kids in the nursery today. Listen to that. And those things would howl and sometimes all during the service. But they are real. They are real. Peacocks are real. But what a sight that must have been for those Jews, those Israelites there, when they were brought there to Israel. And we don't have the time to go into all this stuff here. You go ahead and read the rest of it. Read about all the horses, thousands of horses. When we were there in Israel, they showed us there where the stalls, Solomon's stalls, were for all these thousands of horses and chariots and everything that he had. And let me mention this before we close. Back in Deuteronomy chapter 17, just jot this down, verse 14 through 16. Let me read part of it to you. God here, this is what God's telling me. He said, without coming to the land, what land is he talking about? He's talking about Canaan land, talking about the land of Israel. When you come to the land, which the Lord thy God giveth thee, and shalt possess it, and I will set a king over thee, then thou shalt anywise set him king over thee, whom the Lord thy God shall choose, one among thy brethren. And now look at it. And he shall not, now listen, this is very important, he shall not multiply horses to himself. Solomon did that. Nor cause the people to return to Egypt to the end that he should multiply horses. For as much as the Lord had said unto you, you shall not henceforth return that way. And going on reading, and I won't read any further, but I'll tell you this. First of all, he was not to have horses and not to have chariots. Neither shalt thou multiply wives to himself, talking about that king, that his heart turned not away. Solomon tremendously broke that commandment, didn't he? And then third, neither shalt thou greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. So he broke all three of those commandments that the Lord had given. And so, read the book of Ecclesiastes, which is a sermon by Solomon. And this is after he got right with the Lord. He'd come back to the Lord. There was a while that, he was away from the Lord and grossly away from him. And but there came the time when he did, and he preached that sermon that's recorded there in the book of Ecclesiastes. And he tells about the folly of all the things, that he had engaged in, and come to realize, he then makes that statement, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. No, there's nothing to all of that. And so what Solomon did, what he did, very, very early in his kingdom, began to multiply chariots and horses, and he began to take on, all these wives, and wound up with 700 wives and 300 concubines. And back in that day, a concubine was about the same as a wife, considered about the same as a wife. And so he had all of that. He multiplied chariots, and then all those women that he brought in there. I think it was J. Vernon McGee when he was talking about this on his radio program, and he has recorded now in all the sermons that he preached or Bible lessons. Now you can get them in a set of volumes that are by him, and he's one of the more conservative of the Bible scholars. He's not right about everything. He's not a Baptist. He was Presbyterian, but he is a good fundamental conservative scholar. So when people ask me what is a good commentary, I'll tell them, well, that's one, but you have to realize that if you're a good Baptist, you'll recognize the points where he's wrong. So he's not going to lead you astray if you know what the Bible teaches. And he I think it was J. Vernon McGee said that 700 wives, 300 concubines. He said, no wonder he died so young. I don't know if you're supposed to say that from the pulpit or not, but anyway. And then the Lord said, you're not to multiply yourself gold and silver. You're not to do that. Give it to God. And, man, we know he didn't keep that, did he?
You know, one of the, I think one of the characteristics of our generation is greed. Greed, everybody, you know, getting as much, hoarding as much themselves as they can. Greed. I had an uncle, he owned a farm there in just outside of Ambrose, Georgia. And it was just a small farm. He only had like 100 acres. But his dad had a huge farm. It was, if I remember correctly, something like 600,000 acres. Does that sound too big? But it was a big, huge farm. And he was very wealthy. And he had two boys. My uncle, his name was Melvin, Uncle Melvin, but his nickname, everybody called him Geach. And so we called him Uncle Geach. And he was married to my mom's oldest sister, my Aunt Sis. Her name was Liza, but everybody in my mama's family had nicknames. And so we called her Aunt Sis. No, Geach. Well, the dad died, and he had $600,000 in the bank. Now we're talking about back in the 1950s. I mean, $600,000 was a lot of money back then. And but he had $600,000 cash, but he didn't have a will, didn't leave a will. And so the two brothers then, at trying to divide what are we going to do? Because you see, I may not be absolutely correct, you know, from the lawyer standpoint about this, but I think that what happened with them, because the dad didn't have a will, I think that it went to the state. Is that correct? Some of you lawyers here, I think it went back to the state, and so they had to go to court to to try to get that to them. But they started fighting among themselves about it, and so, make a long story short, over years, it took years for this thing to ever be settled. And when it was all settled, the two brothers, neither one of them got one thin dime out of it. Neither one of them. It all went to the state. They confiscated everything, and had a huge, a mansion that was built on that farm and all that. But because of greed, because they were wanting, instead of dividing it equally, one was wanting more than the other, and they were fighting over the years. I guess it took up all the money they had, and then the state got what was left of the farm and the money that the dad had in the bank. Greed is an awful thing. It's an awful thing. But there's so much of that. So many of our politicians, that's really what they're after. It's just greed. They're not really interested in you and me and doing what's best for us. They're what they can get out of it themselves. And while they may become a senator or president or whatever it may be, and not be worth a whole lot, by the time they're out of office, they're multimillionaires. How does that happen? Okay, stand please, with your heads bowed. My goodness, I've been looking at this clock up here, and it's showing it's still 5 minutes before. I thought it was 8 that it was pointing to, but here on my watch, I got 8:15. So somebody better set that thing, but the battery must be dead. The second hand's not moving, so I guess the battery's dead. But if you're concerned about getting out on time, you better check this thing, because I look at it, not this. They used to put the time, and I guess they still do up there, but I can't see that far anymore, so I don't know what time it is from up there. So anyway, let's go to the Lord in prayer and ask Him to bless these requests that were made here tonight. If you want to glance at your prayer list as you pray, you can do that. Be sure to pray for our service this Sunday. Pray that God will bless and give us another great day Sunday. Had two young ladies saved Sunday. One of them's here tonight. And so pray that the Lord will bless and that the month of mission is going to be successful that in the way and the sense that we meet our goal. We'll consider it success if we meet our goal. All right, so take this time. If you want to come to the altar, you're welcome to. If you'd rather stay where you are, you can do that. Sit down if you want to. But just take these next few minutes and go to the Lord in prayer.